If you're already enveloped within the growing urbanist community on YouTube by now, you've probably heard the name Adam Something. He's a pretty great YouTuber, and while he's not a particularly urbanist-only channel, his content has a lot of appeal to those interested in what needs to change in urban design and beyond. But we're not here to talk about Adam Something done right. We're here to talk about this video, why it's flawed, why his opinions are pervasive in this regard, and what needs to change in terms of architectural design and the conversation we have about it. We begin with what seems like a decently plausible argument, that the reason architecture nowadays is so bland and uninspired, that the reason architecture is the way it is today is due to a shift in public perception towards architecture. It's true, the architecture of neoclassicalism had overstayed its welcome and needed a new aesthetic to bring people into the modern era. But just because something was historically a fad that caught on with the masses' indulgence doesn't make it good. I mean, for someone who's covered the damage that car dependency and American-style suburbanization has caused us, you'd think this point would be more obvious, but oh well. And besides, the recent tide in interest in traditional architectural designs should be a point towards the contrary, in terms of changing tastes being a reason. We've had our time to let modernism and the international style settle down and soak in, and it's not fresh anymore. It isn't a statement to use funky shaped windows or highly geometric designs just because modern construction methods give you the option to. It's created places that aren't nice to walk past, aren't considerate of their environment's climate, indulge unique form over practical function, and aren't considerate of their surrounding constructions. Time and time again, surveys of the public have shown that, nowadays, beautiful architecture is the preferred kind of architecture. 3-to-1 preference according to the Harris poll, just 23% prefer modern architecture according to a YouGov survey. Whatever your personal feelings are towards the world of architecture, the zeitgeist is changing, but the results are not. Changing tastes cannot fully explain things. Which brings us to his next point.
There is an idea in far-right conspiracy circles that actually modern architecture is a plot by the shadowy elites to crush the spirit of white civilization so they can import non-whites into developed countries to dilute the culture and the white gene pool because of reasons. And this might be an interesting plot for a South Park episode, but as usual, reality is a bit more complicated.
Huh. Pretty hot take there. If you disagree with me, you're a far-right ethno-nationalist sympathizer. What a way to swing someone to your side of the debate on an argument over housing shortages. Man, what the hell? But let's not let that mask-off moment become a permanent blemish on this video. After all, we've still got 6 more minutes of blemishes to go. What is this Twitter post actually saying in isolation? Sure, it's blaming it all on party lines, as is typical nowadays, but I could easily have replaced left with right in editing and it would have made no difference to the core message. There's a general consensus that something is wrong with modern housing that is inhuman and uncomfortable. Let that line stick in for a bit in your brain because we'll be going digging for it later. The crux of his argument here relates to commie blocks, the method many European countries use to alleviate their own housing crises. After the bombs were through dropping, homes in ruin, and a population a little too single and ready to mingle, or maybe not single enough, there was a surge in demand for housing. You know the way the US handled these pressures. We had a lot of money to throw around as the only remaining economic superpower, so we happily retreated to suburbia and have been dealing with the consequences ever since. But many other nations across the world did not have this luxury. To get things out quickly, they threw some cheap apartment blocks up and called it a day. And you know what? To his credit, and I'm going to be thrown out of the traditional architecture cool kids table for this one, it worked. Commie blocks made for living. A good living? I don't know. I've never been in them. Might have to check one out someday, but if they worked, they worked. They were certainly better than the squalor they replaced, and I'd be willing to bet better for their respective societies in the long run than American suburbia. Pretty high praise. But the past is the past. It seems like a lot of his early arguments in this video are based off of historical reasons, why architecture of the 50s and 70s were not glamorous. We may be in a housing crisis right now, but we're not nearly in the thick of it like they were in the immediate post-war era. The pre-war era had a ridiculous housing situation to start with. Industrialization prior to the automobile or the tram required people to be within spitting distance of the smokestacks. Add on a few bombed out city centers and a leap and bounds of people breeding like rabbits, and something needed to change immediately. We're not nearly that bad yet. Still really bad. I don't have any hope outside of my parents' place for the immediate future, but we're not in squalor territory yet.
Imagine if some local government spent its public housing money on ornamentation instead of building as many units as possible. Hello citizens, we only built 7 blocks out of 10 due to higher ornament costs, so hundreds of you will not have a roof over your heads. But hey, look how beautiful these 7 blocks are. Now you'll have something nice to look at from under the bridge.
Adam Something's main argument against beauty in this section is that it is dismissible in the face of our housing crisis. So long as the towers come up and people are housed, why should it matter what kind of buildings people are living in? At least they're not on the streets. The issue is threefold here, but relies on a single, flawed principle. Traditional architecture can't work because it would delay the construction of buildings or make them more costly an endeavor to invest in. This sentiment is unfortunately all too common in urbanist and architectural circles, and it has literally no base in reality. But even if it did, a significant investment in architecture today that can last and leave an impact for centuries to come will be more beneficial to our successors than a thrown together concrete mess that'll last 50 years and look ugly while it's doing it. First, this relies on the premise that all that makes architecture beautiful is ornamentation and detail. Yes, ornamentation and detailing always elevate a good piece into a masterwork, but you need a good base. Proportion and symmetry are immensely more valuable to a beautiful building than ornamentation ever will be. I've seen plenty of buildings with lots of ornamentation inspired by traditional designs that fall flat on their face because they don't know what they're doing. The size of windows, where you put them, and the size of the panes themselves hardly push any kind of constraints on budgets. If anything, using less glass would probably save them money in construction. But this further relies on the assumption that ornamentation has to be this expensive and out-of-reach custom thing that only ultra-rich aristocrats could afford its implementation. This was certainly true 300 years ago, but even in the pre-war period, there were lots of implementations in buildings across the Western world that had cheap, mass-produced ornamentation. Hell, nowadays I could afford a halfway good-looking cornice or even to make my own with cheap materials. Look at this man in the eyes and tell me that what he's doing is unaffordable and constraining for American luxury apartment construction. Okay, you might say, but this looks like crap. Good-looking ornamentation costs a hefty penny. That doesn't mean the nice stuff can't also be mass-produced, but you're right, it's not great. But for vernacular architecture, it doesn't totally need to be. For now, just know that good detailing is well within the scope of your average 5/1, even if they aren't really doing anything with it. Surely there's something else at play in favor of modernism. Finally, this argument rests on the idea that our housing shortage is so bad, it mirrors the conditions of the late 40s and we just need to get stuff out there. No, it does not. I could perform at a bar doing karaoke tomorrow and that would not make me MJ. Our housing crisis is bad. Really bad. $1 million shitboxes next to the interstate bad, but at least the 5/1s are an achievable goal I could set myself if I really wanted to live in them. I could even get takeout sometimes. In the 40s, people were breaking the bank over one bedroom in a railroad apartment with no windows. We're not that bad yet. It's okay for now to plan for the future and make our places nice to live in and worth having stick around, because this opportunity of a surge in interest in infill development with lots of land to spare and extraordinarily valuable real estate, it's rare. Let's not squander it with shitty concrete boxes that'll be declared uninhabitable by the government in 70 years. This brings us now to his next point. Not this kind of argument again. Yes, we know that sometimes big corporations buy up buildings to turn them into rental stock. Ooh, big man BlackRock, scary. Yes, we know that Airbnbs are doing big and scary things and they're the only reason the housing crisis exists, apparently in fucking LA. Yes, we know oh, it's not that kind of blame it all on capitalism urbanist argument. Alright, let's give her a listen. This argument boils down to modern-style apartments being more preferred because they're cheaper by companies who don't really care about the lasting impact of their constructions. They just want to get something in the door in a desirable location and into the hands of interested buyers. They can deal with all of the kerfuffle. At least now he seems to agree that these modernist constructions are often poorly built and only intended to last as long as they need to. As I've made apparent before, I don't totally buy this theory, and we can see its cracks develop when we look at the most crucial element of this idea.
You see, from the late 20th century onward, housing was increasingly looked at not as spaces to live, but as commodities to be bought and sold.
Housing not as places to live, but as commodities to be bought, sold, and controlled. You're treading on some dangerously ignorant grounds, Adam, but hey, we're still in reasonability so far.
This culminated in the 2000s housing bubble.
Ah, jeez, he did it. He blamed the housing bubble on it. God damn it, I thought you were one of the good ones.
People simply stopped planning for durability, quality, and proper aesthetics. Just get the cheapest materials you can, put up a building that looks reasonably nice, and sell it at inflated prices. Due to their low-quality construction, the buildings would start falling apart in a few years, but it doesn't matter, since by then you will have already made your money, and the building would be on its 7th owner, who is looking to sell it at an even higher price.
Wait, hey, this isn't half bad. There you go, Adam, you're bringing it right back.
Housing went from places to live to a speculation scheme, a hot potato match among investors, but when the music stopped, everyone went bankrupt.
Oh no, not this again. Man, listen, I know. It is the single easiest argument to make. Landlord's bad. Then everyone claps and the bartender offers you a free drink and your date winks at you and you get home and the next morning your boss offers you a raise. It makes the rounds, it gets people going, it clicks into that primal, instinctual, monkey brain hatred of landlords. But the way it's positioned makes it seem like you're also blaming it for sky-high housing prices, and we know how bull-honky that argument is by now. I know it's an easy dunk, but it spreads a pretty pervasive half-truth that's only really applicable if you live in like a resort town or something. Having 1 million impressionable subscribers, you'd think implying that something is out of our hands because it's all the big guy's faults would be outside of your consideration, but
as people have started treating real estate as a speculative investment.
I digress. Let's circle back to that whole profit motive idea though, that the only thing these constructions are chasing is the bag. You think that if they wanted to charge a little extra, they'd put in like the 0% added construction cost of making it symmetrical and proportional? Or maybe they would put it like the 1% added construction cost of the bare minimum ornamentation and detailing. We've already seen that. People far prefer traditional design to modernist design. I imagine if you pitched a 5/1 against a houseman pattern at the same price point, it wouldn't be a debate for renters. It can't be the most impossible idea for developers to consider emulating the houseman pattern in their own designs while sticking to contemporary building methods. Might get through approval easier too. Here's the thing though, it does look good to investors. This is the image of the future though, not this. It's too risky an idea. The issue is right at the core of the argument you're dancing around like fly to dog shit, dressing it in a populist veneer to make it seem like you're not suggesting the unthinkable, but I'll be the one to suggest it. The people designing these buildings are too disconnected from the places it'll actually be located in and could not care less about the consequences of their designs. For one, you have the engineers who produce like 5 CAD models in a weekend that's rolled out en masse to Des Moines and Merced and 50 other downtown revitalization programs. For another, you have the architecture students who work tirelessly on a facade that would look interesting back in 1990. And, oh yeah, maybe I'll do a little work on the interior design. People only really need one skinny window, right? Just to play it safe, I'll make every wall a window. Who needs blinds anyways? A perfect, uncompromising view of a parking lot. Oh boy, I just love how anybody passing by on the street has an unobstructed view of me in my underwear watching TV. Stop it with the big windows. Stop it. It makes people want to put up their blinds. Stop making them take up like 90% of the facade space. You're raising energy bills. Stop making them with the world's largest window panes. All you need is this. Don't do this either. Okay, it's kind of not this architecture kid's fault. He probably went into school wanting to make beauty. He's just doing what his professors told him to do. The current opinion of a lot of folks within the contemporary professional and academic school of architecture is that the wave of interest in traditional architecture is literally dangerous. But I think it's more dangerous to ignore the interest. The biggest issue in architecture today is that the buildings are viewed out of context. Here's a nice render of our new innovative architecture plan. What would that look like in relation to its surroundings? Okay, I mean, here you go. But look at this! The superpower of modernist architecture is curb appeal. It looks nice in a render completely alone in a green field. It looks nice driving along its length at 45 miles an hour. It might even look nice if you park all the way out in the back and walk gradually towards it. This is the contemporary architect's comfort zone. It's what his entire curriculum up until now has been based off of for the past century. But pass it on the street next to a bunch of other buildings, especially in an otherwise traditional area, and the flaws start to make themselves present. It's like the state of traffic engineering in academia. For so long, it's been based off of the throughput of private vehicles to such a degree that those wanting to make a change in transit and cycling infrastructure are burned out. But that sentiment, that traffic engineering shouldn't just be for cars, is changing, and for good reason. All because the court of public opinion towards urban design is shifting in favor of traditional styled urban planning with cities designed for people rather than automobiles and parking. So if the court of public opinion towards architecture is also changing, why aren't we acknowledging that and just calling it scary? Well, today it's time to acknowledge that, with the final point that Atom Something provides, the true reason why contemporary architecture is so bad. It's our old friend, car dependency.
Recently, the beautiful Art Nouveau facade of Prague main station was renovated. The station regained its former splendor, but almost nobody noticed, because no one is there to see it, because there's an urban freeway and an elevated parking lot right in front of it. If you want to experience the facade's architectural beauty, you have to crawl through dark, piss-smelling underpasses and grimy, rusted spiral stairs and stand in the middle of a concrete parking lot next to an urban freeway. Hardly a conducive environment for savoring the arts.
Architecture prior to car centrism had a very particular relationship with this residence and with those who passed its length by. First, you had what I call the streetscape. That is the experience of walking past a building parallel to it on the street. You could more accurately consider the streetscape this sightline of a row of buildings whose facade was perpendicular to your view. Then you've got the view of a building as seen straight on along the street, what I'll refer to as the street facade. This is where symmetry and such play their role. In a similar vein, you've also got the perspective of the building up close, where the only real facet to focus on was the ground floor and all the ornaments. Accordingly, we can call it the ground floor facade. Finally, the building itself requires a consideration of interior design to ensure the publicness of the street is able to transition into the privateness of the bedroom in a way that doesn't intrude on daily activities. This is what Christopher Alexander refers to as the intimacy gradient, since the room further from the public street was more concealed and thus more intimate. This is all a well and good way of interacting with the building, and with a little exception is what we managed with for millennia. But shift your social system from viewing everything through a summer stroll to a windshield, and suddenly things start to change. There are two kinds of travel we engage with in our modern lives, being the route travel and destination travel. In route travel, you are going from one point to another with little consideration for what exists in between. In destination travel, the in-between is precisely what is being engaged with. The uncertainty of where you're going to end up in is part of the charm. If you just need to get from your house to where you work and you don't really have a lot of time to sleaze around and loiter, then you're following a route. But if you're just stumbling around and getting lost into the thick of things, well, you're at your destination. Bikes in your own 2 feet are great for destination travel, since there is little in between you and the outside environment. Cars and public transit introduce a bubble preventing this enveloping from the greater urban fabric. They're more apt for route travel. Transit has the benefit of creating destinations through the mere act of stopping somewhere and a lack of user interaction. You're just transported from one place to another, one destination to another destination. The social barrier is hardly a consideration, but spending extended periods of time in this bubble, as is the case for car travel, leaves one disconnected from their broader social system. What we run into is the trouble of turning every individual building into a destination in of itself, rather than making it a cohesive whole of a larger streetscape and urban fabric. Take a look at this building here. Not too remarkable, it's quite boring actually, lacking a lot of the details we expect. If a whole apartment block was styled like this, we'd cry foul. Now let's put it in context. What a gorgeous street. I'd love to take a stroll along this place sometime. Living here must be a dream. Architecture, in particular vernacular architecture, does not have an absurd need to be stylish and over-ornamentalized within itself. So long as the building fits like a brick with its surroundings, it's golden because it forms a place that is pleasant to be in through variety. The variety of lots of little investments on their own rather humble to create a place of well-regard. The way a simple building like this fits in is with the abiding of 3 fundamental laws of architectural beauty. I'll call it that for now. These are the beauty of proportions, the beauty of symmetry, and the beauty of stability. Proportion is a pretty simple concept. Your building along a streetscape is like a wall with holes punched into it for windows and doors. It should seem as though the holes are held open by a thickening of the material, supporting its space from being collapsed back into entropy. Think of punching a hole into cardboard. The material deforms to your punching and forms a thickening to support its existence. But it also relates to the amount of holes and their size. A good general percentage point is 20% window to facade space. You can certainly go lower than this and see great results like the windows in traditional Pueblo buildings, and you can certainly go a little higher over this percent. The amount you deviate should rely on the climate, with larger windows for colder environments. You really shouldn't go too big. Generally, the larger you go in terms of window size, the more significant the thickening should be. Small windows need hardly any thickening, while monumental windows need a good support. But if you add too many windows, make them too large, and in the process not leave enough space for the base material to withstand or the thickening to take hold, It seems odd, like drawing eyes that are too large on an otherwise realistic face. It seems that these holes cannot be held up by what is presented, and so it feels off in some way, even if there is no technical structural danger in this regard. Note that this point mostly presents itself in the street facade, and is mostly for the sake of keeping private rooms private. If you have public rooms, like an entrance room or a ground floor storefront, it can often be better to use large exposing windows. Just remember to keep your climate in mind. Symmetry is an even easier idea. Keep windows and doors within equal distance to each other. Changing things up to look quirky just makes it look low effort. If you are low effort, then, you can show it, but don't intentionally look low effort with bad symmetry. Repeat elements in your design that ought to be repeated. Stability, however, requires us to delve in a little deeper, and to talk about that, we need to talk about the torii gate. Two vertical lines intercepted by a continuous horizontal line. Or alternatively, a horizontal beam held up by two vertical posts. This is the most prime symbol of stability. How do you relate an idea like that to construction? Well, let's take a look at the Haussmann pattern. In particular, I want to draw your attention to the pilasters here. Lined up in a series, they appear to hold the floors above it in place, like they're stacked on top of each other. These pilasters really don't do anything but look pretty, but they sure do give the impression of suspension, security, and stability, most crucial of all. Now, okay, if the appeal of variety is that there are individually small investments working in context of its surroundings to foster a beautiful, greater streetscape, what is the appeal in using the Haussmann pattern as an example? The Haussmann pattern is monumental! The buildings are grandiose, about on par with our 5/1s mentioned before. How can variety exist when the pattern takes up a whole block? This is where the beauty of ornamentation comes into play. When you have monumental constructions, you need to reintroduce variety through some kind of alternative means to appeal to the streetscape and the street facade. Sure, this building on its own has a rather drab door frame and a lack of interesting notes, but because it's very close to another building that's interesting in its own way, it works. It doesn't overstay its welcome as you walk past it, so to say, and it doesn't overstate itself when it's welcome. But if you take this exact pattern and repeat it over and over again over a whole city block, that's when we start to run into the issue of a lack of variety again. To reintroduce variety on the ground floor, you can put in space for businesses. This adds variety to the streetscape. Then on the upper floors, you can reinstate the principles of proportion, symmetry, and stability by emphasizing their detail with ornamentation. This adds variety to the street facade. And voila! Even in a building that seems to go on for miles and miles, the experience of walking along it is not soured in the same way walking along a large commie block or an international-style office building would be. So here's where we're at now. Modernism came about at the same time that car centrism did, and it wasn't any kind of coincidence, as some might assume. Both ideas came out of the belief that the 50s were the endpoint of history, and that the now was far more important than the past. Buildings stopped being units in an ever-evolving system, and became those systems all on their own. This was spurred on because, well, when you're behind the wheel, you don't want to stop at several different locations to do your daily activities. Everything had to conglomerate with each other, and this required things to be bigger in construction. The effect of this was monumentalization. Stores got bigger, small stores were brought into strip malls, suburban homes were just parts of huge subdivisions, etc. If you had to build bigger than ever on buildings that saw fewer eyes than ever, how would you go about making them unique and interesting? Well, you break a few rules in traditional architecture to affect the facade itself, as a sign of being unbound to the past. But as we've come to know, the 50s were not the end of history, and the things we figured were best left behind have come back to haunt us. Because those sorts of things don't just come out of nowhere and stick around. There are reasons they're implemented. But how do we reverse this process? It's simple. Build incremental. If you need to build monumental, build ornamental. Focus life back onto the street rather than the parking lot. Follow the 4 simple guidelines of architectural beauty, of proportion, symmetry, stability, and variety in your constructions. Acknowledge your building's surroundings and context, what everybody else is doing. Acknowledge your climate and environmental considerations, such that your residents aren't at odds with nature. And take care and pride and happiness in the places you build, because nothing's more obvious in a building than a creator who didn't care. If we're going to be moving on into a pedestrian future, we can't have an artifact of the car-centric past holding us down. Build for people, build for the community, and build for beauty's sake. Hey, thank you for making it to the end of the video. Thank you for watching. This is my first video on urbanism. hopefully not the last. So, I mean, if you're interested, give it a subscribe. You might have noticed that my usual sort of content is very far away from this urbanist architecture conversation, but I still think it's an important conversation to have, right? Because I think we don't really understand the value in like fighting for these things until it's like made apparent to us. Like how a lot of people in the urbanist sphere originally didn't understand the whole idea about like, oh, car centrism is bad. When I used to bike, you know, back and forth to the store, I didn't grasp in my head that the reason why it sucked was because it was designed for cars. I was just like, that's just how cities are, but they're not. It's not how it's supposed to be, right? It was made that way. And this is sort of the similar situation where if you don't understand why, like where modernism comes from, it can make sense to just say, well, it looks cool, right? Without understanding why it came to that stage and why it's such a problem. So I think it's important to sort of clear that up, and that's the main reason I made this video. I'm hoping to get another video down, but considering how long this video took, it might be a while, so I mean, yeah, stay tuned. Thank you. Have a good one.